A black billionaire CEO ignored the beggar until his son stopped, looked back, and said, "Mom, that's Dad." Kaleb Vance held his father's hand tightly as they exited the grand ballroom of the Metropolitan Arts Center. The building towered behind them, steel and glass reflecting the city's skyline in fractured gold. Men in tailored tuxedos barked into phones near the valet line. Women in jeweled gowns posed beneath crystalline chandeliers that hung like frozen waterfalls. The scent of aged whiskey and imported cologne still clung to Kaleb's small suit jacket. His father, Elias Vance, didn't pause. He was already on the phone, one hand adjusting his cufflinks, the other guiding Kaleb down the granite steps with practiced efficiency. "Yes, finalize the merger by Friday," Elias said into his earpiece, his voice smooth and commanding. "I want the contracts on my desk before market open." Kaleb looked up at him but didn't say anything. In his small hand, he clutched a worn brown teddy bear, something that didn't belong in this polished world. Something that used to live in a different home, with a different voice that hummed lullabies and whispered bedtime stories. They turned onto a side street that had lost its lights. It was quieter here, darker. Puddles reflected the dim glow from a shuttered cafe. Kaleb walked slower. Something tugged at him. Then he heard it. A soft voice, almost drowned by the wind. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." He stopped. Just ahead, near the edge of a closed storefront, a woman sat hunched beside a battered stroller. Her dark hair was wrapped in a faded scarf, loose strands falling across her hollow cheeks. Her coat was too large, fraying at the sleeves, and her hands, trembling slightly, moved carefully over something inside the stroller. Kaleb blinked. It wasn't a baby. A small teddy bear lay wrapped in a torn blanket. The woman was shielding it from the cold wind, murmuring softly as though it were alive. Elias caught the change in pace. He glanced sideways quickly, then turned his eyes away. His grip on Kaleb's hand tightened. "Don't stare, Kaleb," he said, voice clipped and sharp. "Keep walking." Kaleb resisted slightly but let himself be pulled forward. Elias didn't look back. In his mind, he categorized the woman immediately: young, disheveled, mentally unstable, probably substance dependent. Another urban problem someone else would handle. Not his concern. He had written his check to the homeless initiative tonight. He had done his part. Still, something about the song. He shook it off. "I'm exhausted. It's been a long evening." Kaleb glanced over his shoulder again. The woman leaned forward, whispering, "Shh, sleep, baby." Her hand brushed gently over the teddy bear's worn fabric head. The words hit Kaleb's chest like a memory. That voice. That whisper. That was how his mother used to soothe him, not just the song, but the exact rhythm, the way the sh floated into the air like a kiss goodnight. He stopped walking. "Dad," Kaleb said, his voice small but certain. "That's Mom." Elias froze. For a moment, the street went completely silent in his ears. He turned slowly, eyes locking onto the woman behind them. She was still seated, eyes down, lips moving to finish the verse. The streetlight flickered above her, casting shadows that made her face harder to read. But Elias saw it, the slope of her jaw, the rich tone of her skin beneath the dirt, and the faint, uneven line across her right temple. A scar. Part of him staggered inside. "No," he said out loud, more to himself than to Kaleb. "That's not possible." He crouched slightly to meet his son's eyes, trying to stay calm. "Kaleb, your mom is, she's gone." You know that. Kaleb didn't blink. He looked back toward the woman, his voice even quieter. She's not gone. She's just not home yet. Elias opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came. Instead, his gaze drifted once more to the woman and her small, ragged teddy bear. She looked up just then, only for a second, and her eyes, tired and distant, brushed past him like a ghost who didn't recognize her own name. Tear streaks glistened on her cheeks under the pale light. Elias straightened up, clearing his throat. "Come on," he said quickly. "Let's go." But this time, he didn't pull Kaleb. He just stood there. And in the pause, in the unsettled breath between one step and the next, something in him, solid and logical for so long, began to crack. Just a little. Elias took a step forward, his hand extended cautiously, as if approaching something fragile and wild. "Excuse me," he said softly, his voice stripped of its usual authority. I just want to." The woman's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide, pupils darting between Elias and the stroller. Her breathing quickened. She grabbed the handles of the stroller and pulled it closer, her body folding protectively over the teddy bear inside. "No," she whispered, shaking her head rapidly. "No, no, no. You can't take him. Please don't take him." Her voice cracked, raw with panic. Elias stopped immediately, raising both hands. "I'm not going to take anything. I promise. I just..." But she was already moving. She stood abruptly, the stroller's wheels squeaking as she yanked it backward. Her movements were jerky, frantic. She stumbled slightly, caught herself against the wall, then turned and hurried down the street, disappearing into the shadows between two buildings. Elias stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest. Kaleb tugged on his sleeve. "Dad, why did she run?" Elias didn't answer. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on the spot where she'd been sitting. And there, left behind on the cracked pavement, was a small piece of torn fabric, part of the blanket she'd wrapped around the bear. Kaleb knelt down and picked it up carefully. He turned it over in his small hands, then looked up at his father with wide, knowing eyes. "This is from my bear," he said quietly. "The one Mommy made for me." Elias took the fabric from Kaleb's hand, his fingers trembling slightly as he examined it. Faded blue cotton. Hand-stitched edges. A tiny embroidered star in the corner, barely visible now, but unmistakable. He had bought the fabric himself. 3 years ago. Before the accident. Before everything fell apart. Kaleb clutched his own teddy bear tighter against his chest, his thumb tracing the identical stitching along its worn ear. "She still has him," Kaleb whispered. "She kept him safe." Elias's throat tightened. He looked down the empty street where Nia had vanished, then back at the scrap of fabric in his hand. His breath came shallow and uneven. For the first time in 3 years, the careful walls he'd built around his grief began to tremble. "We have to find her," Kaleb said, his voice steady despite the tears pooling in his eyes. "We have to bring her home." Elias nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. "We will," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I promise you, son. We will." The morning came with wind that cut through layers of worn fabric. Nia sat curled at the edge of a shuttered bakery, her arms wrapped around the faded stuffed bear resting inside the second-hand stroller. The wheels squeaked slightly every time she rocked it back and forth, a gentle, rhythmic motion. Soothing. Maternal. It's cold today, she murmured, tightening the threadbare scarf around the bear's neck. We'll find a warmer spot soon, baby. Mommy promises. She didn't remember how she got here. Not really. The memories before the cold were fractured, shattered glass, the smell of burning rubber, someone screaming her name. Then nothing. Just darkness. And when she woke, weeks later, in a hospital bed with no name and no one looking for her, the only thing she knew for certain was that she had a son. Kaleb. His name lived in her chest like a heartbeat. She didn't know his face anymore. Couldn't picture his smile or the exact color of his eyes. But she knew his voice. Soft. Sweet. Calling for her in the dark. She had searched for him. 4 months. Wandering the city streets, asking strangers, showing them the only thing she had left, a torn photograph she'd found in her coat pocket. A blurry image of a small boy holding a teddy bear. But no one knew him. No one had seen him. And eventually, the shelter stopped letting her in. The questions became accusations. The kindness turned cold. So she learned to survive in the shadows. She found the stroller abandoned near a dumpster and filled it with the bear, the one that looked just like the one in the photograph. It became her son. Her anchor. The only thing keeping her from disappearing entirely. Every night, she would sing to him. You are my sunshine. The melody came without thought, like breathing. And sometimes, when the wind was quiet and the streetlights flickered just right, she could almost hear him singing back. She looked up at the towering glass building across the street. Vance Towers. She had been living in its shadow for over a year now, though she didn't know why it felt familiar. Didn't know that the man who owned it had once held her in his arms and promised forever. All she knew was that somewhere, her son was waiting. And she would keep singing. Keep hoping. Keep protecting this small, fragile piece of him until the day they found each other again. Elias sat in his corner office on the 42nd floor of Vance Towers, staring at the surveillance footage on his screen. He had called in every favor, deployed every resource. Private investigators. Facial recognition software. Shelter databases. Nothing. Until today. The footage showed a woman sitting near the east entrance of his own building. Same stroller. Same bear. Same song drifting faintly through the audio feed. She had been there for months. Right under his nose. And the charity fund he'd established, the one that bore his late wife's name, had walked past her every single day. His chest tightened with something sharp and bitter. Shame. He closed the laptop and stood, stripping off his suit jacket and loosening his tie. He couldn't go to her like this, not as Elias Vance, CEO. Not as the man who had ignored her on the street. That evening, he returned to the east entrance dressed in jeans and a plain jacket, a paper cup of tea in his hand. He found her in the same spot, rocking the stroller gently, humming under her breath. He didn't approach immediately. Just sat down on the curb a few feet away, close enough to be seen but far enough not to startle her. After a long silence, he spoke. I used to know someone who sang that song. Nia's hand stilled on the stroller. She didn't look at him. But she didn't run either. Do you have a son? Elias asked quietly. For a moment, nothing. Then she nodded, barely. Yes, she whispered. His name is Kaleb. Elias felt his breath catch. His hands trembled as he set the tea down on the pavement between them. "He's not lost," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. "He's been looking for you." Nia's head turned slowly. Her eyes met his, confused, fragile, searching. And for the first time in 3 years, Elias let himself cry. "If this story is reaching you, if it's stirring something in your chest, please don't keep it to yourself. There are thousands of people in this community who need to hear it too, people walking through their own shadows, waiting for a light. Hit that subscribe button. Not for me. For them. Because stories like this remind us we're never truly invisible. And that kind of hope? It's meant to be shared." The apartment was small but warm, tucked into a quiet corner of the city far from the cold sidewalks where Nia had been surviving. Elias had arranged everything carefully, an on-call nurse, soft lighting, clean bedding, and a stocked kitchen with chamomile tea and honey. Nothing grand. Nothing overwhelming. Just safety. Nia stood in the doorway, staring at the space as if it might disappear. Her fingers gripped the stroller handle so tightly her knuckles went pale. Kaleb, the bear, was still tucked inside, wrapped in the same torn blanket. "You can stay here as long as you need," Elias said gently from behind her. "No one will bother you. You're safe." She didn't respond. Just stepped inside slowly, her eyes scanning every corner like a trapped animal assessing an unfamiliar cage. Over the next few days, Elias visited often, always bringing something small, tea, bread, a new blanket. But Nia barely spoke. She would sit by the window for hours, rocking the bear, singing softly. She didn't recognize him. Not as her husband. Not as the father of her child. To her, he was only the man who had ignored her on the street. The man in the expensive suit who had looked through her like she didn't exist. And now, he was asking her to trust him. One evening, Kaleb, the real Kaleb, arrived. He walked in slowly, holding his own teddy bear, and placed it gently beside hers on the bed. 2 bears. Nearly identical. Nia stared at them, her breath catching. Her hands hovered above the toys, trembling. Something deep inside her chest cracked open. "Why do I feel like I know you?" she whispered. Kaleb didn't answer. He just stepped forward and wrapped his small arms around her. And for the first time in 3 years, Nia let herself be held. Kaleb became the thread that held them together. Every evening, he would sit between Nia and Elias on the small couch, his teddy bear in one arm, hers in the other. He would ask questions, innocent, simple questions that opened doors Nia didn't know existed. "Mom, do you remember the park? The one with the big fountain?" Kaleb asked one night, his eyes wide and hopeful. Nia's brow furrowed. She shook her head slowly. I don't know, baby." Elias leaned forward carefully, his voice soft. "It was where we got married," he said. "You wore a cream dress with gold threading. You said you wanted something that felt like sunrise." He paused, watching her face. "You carried sunflowers instead of roses because you said they looked like hope." Nia's breath hitched. Her fingers traced the edge of the blanket in her lap. "Sunflowers," she whispered. The word felt familiar on her tongue, like something she'd tasted before but couldn't place. Elias pulled out his phone and showed her a photograph. A younger version of herself, radiant and smiling, holding a bouquet of bright yellow flowers. Beside her stood Elias, his arm around her waist, his eyes full of something she couldn't name. She stared at the image for a long time. Her hand reached out, hovering just above the screen. "I don't remember her," she said quietly. "But I feel like I should." Kaleb climbed into her lap, pressing his small hand against her cheek. "It's okay, Mommy," he said. "You don't have to remember everything. You just have to stay." Nia's eyes filled with tears. She pulled him close, burying her face in his hair. "I'm not going anywhere," she whispered. Elias watched them, his heart breaking and healing all at once. He didn't push. Didn't demand recognition or gratitude. He simply sat beside them, night after night, offering pieces of a life she'd lost, hoping that one day, she might find her way back. The boardroom was cold and sterile, filled with men in sharp suits and sharper ambitions. Elias sat at the head of the table, his jaw tight, his expression unreadable. Across from him, Marcus Denton leaned back in his chair with a smug smile. "Let's be honest, Elias," Marcus said, sliding a tablet across the table. "This is a PR nightmare. Your wife, if we can even call her that, was found living on the streets like a vagrant. The press is calling you negligent. Our shareholders are calling you a liability." Elias's eyes didn't waver. "My wife is recovering from trauma. That's not a scandal. That's a tragedy." "It's both," Marcus snapped. "And the board has lost confidence in your ability to lead this company while your personal life is in shambles. We're calling for a vote. Step down voluntarily, or we'll remove you." Elias's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced down. A text from the nurse. "Kaleb has a fever. 103, we're taking him to the hospital." His world stopped. Marcus noticed the shift in his expression and pressed harder. "This is exactly what I'm talking about. You can't even focus during a..." Elias stood abruptly, grabbing his coat. "This meeting is over. If you walk out that door, Elias, you lose everything," Marcus said coldly. Elias paused at the doorway, his hand on the frame. He looked back, his voice steady and unflinching. "I already lost everything once. I won't make that mistake again." He walked out. An hour later, he was at the hospital, still in his suit, holding Kaleb's small hand as nurses worked quickly around them. Nia sat on the other side of the bed, her face pale with fear. "Is he going to be okay?" she whispered. Elias nodded, though his own heart was racing. "He's strong. Just like his mother." Nia looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time, she saw past the stranger. She saw the man who had given up his empire to be here. The man who was trembling just as much as she was. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For staying." Elias squeezed Kaleb's hand gently. "There's nowhere else I'd be." The rain came without warning, soft at first, then steady. Nia stood under the cover of a large oak tree in the park, watching the droplets fall in silver sheets across the grass. Kaleb was playing nearby with Elias, chasing after a small red ball that kept rolling away in the wind. "Come on, Mom," Kaleb called, laughing. "It's just water." Nia smiled faintly but didn't move. Something about the rain felt heavy. Familiar. Elias walked over, his shirt already damp, his hair curling slightly from the moisture. He extended his hand. "Dance with me," he said. She blinked. "What?" "Just once," he said gently. "Please." She hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He pulled her out into the rain, and suddenly they were standing in the open, water streaming down their faces. He began to hum, low and soft, a melody she didn't recognize but somehow knew. "This was our song," Elias said, his voice breaking slightly. "The night I proposed. It was raining just like this. You said yes before I even finished asking." Nia's breath caught. The world around her blurred. The rain. The song. The way his hand fit against hers. It all crashed into her at once, a flood of images, sounds, feelings. "You are my sunshine." She heard herself singing. Not to a bear, but to a baby. To Kaleb. Her Kaleb. She gasped, stumbling back slightly. "Elias," she whispered, his name falling from her lips like a prayer she'd forgotten. His eyes widened. "Nia?" "I remember," she said, tears mixing with the rain on her cheeks. "I remember you. I remember us." He pulled her into his arms, and she collapsed against him, sobbing. Not from grief, but from relief. From the overwhelming, aching joy of finally coming home. Kaleb ran over, wrapping his arms around both of them. And there, in the rain, the three of them stood together, broken, healed, and whole all at once. 6 months later, the grand opening of the Elias Vance Memorial Shelter drew a crowd that stretched down 2 city blocks. It wasn't just another charity photo op. It was a revolution. Medical care, mental health services, job training, childcare, everything Nia had needed and never received. Elias stood at the podium, Nia beside him, Kaleb between them. He didn't give a polished speech. He just told the truth. "I walked past my own wife and didn't recognize her," he said, his voice steady but raw. "Not because she had changed, but because I had stopped seeing. I had stopped caring about the people right in front of me." Nia squeezed his hand. She had insisted on speaking too. "I survived because I had hope," she said into the microphone, her voice soft but strong. "Even when I didn't remember my name, I remembered love. And that's what we want to give here. Not pity. Not charity. But dignity. And hope." The crowd erupted in applause. Later that evening, the three of them walked home together, not in a limousine, but on foot. They stopped to talk to a man sitting outside a convenience store. Elias handed him a card with the shelter's address. Nia crouched down and asked his name. Kaleb gave him his extra granola bar. They didn't walk past anyone anymore. They walked with them. Because they had learned the hardest truth of all: love isn't something you buy or build. It's something you see. Every single day. In every single person. Even the ones the world has taught you to ignore. And if you've made it this far, if this story has touched something inside you that you thought was long buried, don't let it end here. There are people in your life, in your city, in this community who are waiting to be seen. Hit that subscribe button. Not because I asked, but because stories like this only matter if we let them change us. And change always starts with one person who refuses to look away. Be that person. For someone else. And maybe, just maybe, for yourself too.